G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of Free Kick on Air. This being a live recording on Friday before the start of round 10. It's been another tumultuous week, probably the most tumultuous we've had in terms of team announcements, and so there is no better person to join me than my good friend Jono. How are you this fine spring Friday?
Yeah, doing well. I've just got off the phone with 45 minutes of tech trying to get my TV working again, so we're all sorted for tonight's footy matches.
Geez, that's a warm up.
Oh, you know when they're asking the questions like, have you turned it off and on again? Is everything plugged in? And it takes 10 minutes to run through all that. Oh, just really keeps you.
I don't envy you. Yeah, look, I really seriously don't envy you. I reckon we're going to jump very quickly into team announcements because I think that there will be a ton of fascinating discussion just given the sheer volume of injuries and issues that we've copped as a result of last weekend's games. Let's jump straight into Port Adelaide against Hawthorn. For the Hawks, probably the less interesting team in this instance, just from fantasy purposes. Out go Michaela Williamson and Ellie Simmons, and in come Grace Barber and friend of the pod in spirit, Tamara Smith. And then for Port Adelaide, it's been a tough week. So out go Lily Patterson and Alyssa Brooke omitted, and obviously Piper Window injured. And then just to stick the knife in for anyone who needed some bench coverage this weekend, Lauren Young injured, and in come Jasmine Stewart, Chloe Gaunt, Abby Dowrick, and Jasmine Evans. I think if you've got the situation where you've copped 3 injuries on field, maybe 4, we'll talk about some of them later. The Lauren Young out was a knife to the heart. Is there It is absolutely brutal, and unfortunately, it's one of those situations where we can't really suggest a whole lot to help. Well, actually, no, that's not necessarily true. I was thinking about this on the ride home from work, and the question is, if you had to downgrade to a forward this week to potentially have a like a score that's sufficiently okay, or the possibility of a coverage score, who would you be looking at from Lauren Young to try and generate some cash at the same time if you needed that to grease the wheel elsewhere?
From Lauren Young, so we're going down. Okay.
We're going down. And I know that means that there are a lot of options, just absolutely everywhere.
I mean, technically, Amelia Yasir is cheaper. It might only be about 10K, but I don't mind that. I think if I was trying to make money, though, I'd want to be going someone at the 300K mark, and I'd probably go Ariana Clark, who put up a 46 last week, has a decent break even. I think that's where I'd go. Is that where you were looking?
I think it's Ariana Clark, but it's more a case of I'm not entirely certain of the likelihood that Clark will generate a score that's good for coverage. I think is my concern. I wonder, and this is someone that I had previously looked at before I was hit with 3 injuries in my team. It's Lou Stevenson, just with some very soft matchups to end the year, has a game against Gold Coast this week. I would not be shocked if she puts up a 50, which at this point in the season and given the carnage we've got and the price she's at, I think is actually passable.
Yeah. I mean, I could see a 40. I think a 50 would be her best score of the year. But it is the Gold Coast,
maybe
who knows?
It is the Gold Coast Suns. They are notorious for being the team where you get your best score of the year.
Yeah. Although randomly, Lou Stevenson's best 2 scores this year come against Brisbane and Melbourne. I did not see that coming.
I must admit, I didn't look at that section of it per se. So that's a surprise. But you know what? She's an experienced player of all, and has a very inexperienced Western Bulldogs lineup in general. I'm not, I'll give it to her as a feather in her cap. I just think it's the fact that Gold Coast have just allowed points to basically every position at every point of the year. So I don't think that she is the worst option this week. You say that Yassia's going to get you 10K. Maybe you needed 40K. Sarah Hosking has a break-even of 9. And was playing off halfback too, which is a better role for scoring than her pressure forward spot.
Yeah.
So those are some of the options if you are desperate for coverage. If you're sitting in the position though where you've got to, find a player to upgrade in the forward line from Piper Window, there are a number of options in this game. I'll throw 4 at you: Stone, Gilroy, McDonough, and Woodland. For their price, who do you like best?
I think I would go Stone based on the idea that you'll have a good role. It's a great break even, and you're going to make cash this week. I think whoever you get, I don't know if I would want them to last the season. If I was going on purely scoring alone, I'd probably go McDonough. But knowing that they've got North Melbourne in the final round, I think I like the idea of getting Stone in, riding it for 1 or 2 weeks, and then going and taking the cash that you're going to make and taking it to one of the premium forwards of the competition.
Yeah, and to be honest, with that final round, I don't even think that you might not even be trading in a premium forward that week. It might actually be a bit of a 1 week, let's call it a opportunistic play in order to be able to generate some cash to try it elsewhere. Because I do think that the forward line is the position that across men's and women's fantasy platforms, it is a very classic last round of the season option to try and find a key forward with a really easy matchup who might be a fair bit cheaper than, say, someone going up against the best team in the competition. So I think Stone's not a bad option. If you've got the cash, I think Ash Woodland, if you don't already have her, is where I would be looking. If you would like to be matching, depending where you are, almost certainly matching the teams above you if you don't already have Ash Woodland. So I definitely think that there are a few options in this game. I think we've kind of seen at the moment that Eileen Gilroy might still be rounding into form, which is not necessarily bad for Hawthorn. It probably means she'll come into proper form by the time we get to by the time Hawthorn get to finals. But I just think for fantasy purposes at the moment, it's just not exactly clicking for her. In terms of any other players in this game, Grace Barber is very cheap, but I don't think she's going to score particularly well. And there is a case to be made that Abby Dowrick, with all the injuries in the midfield at Port Adelaide, will probably could have her best scoring run in maybe the last 2 years in this last 3 weeks of the season.
Yeah, no, 100%.
In terms of, are there any other names you want to kind of discuss here? I guess it is the premium ruck matchup, Wales against Schultz.
Yeah.
Let's do a little game of predictions. Who scores more out of the pair of them?
I mean, I have to back in Wales. I think, she won the Battle of the Rucks when it came to her against Strom. I think she'll get it done again. But it'll be interesting because I think with Strom being the stronger ruck and Wales probably better around the ground, I think Schultz and Wales have really similar strengths. So this is going to be a fascinating matchup.
Yes, I would say that, there is a little bit more surgeon's knife to blacksmith's hammer in the way that they use the ball or the way they look to exit from stoppages between the pair of them. But I do agree that they both are players that will excel or look to excel around the ground. I'd say that Lucy Wales' hands are better when it comes to marking. As much as Schultz has mark of the year previously, she has, I would call it, some notoriously hard hands when going up for marks. And it was very frustrating to watch her when I owned her, only for then her to rediscover some of her marking capabilities on some random occasions at times. I think as well that it will be Wales this week who is the better scorer. I do think that Hawthorn will probably have put this matchup, kind of planted the flag, and are looking to really atone for what was, up until this year, the most spectacular loss in AFLW history. just from where the points were at three-quarter time. Sorry to really dig into some old wounds there.
Oh, they've been coming up all week. Don't worry about it. Yeah.
Look, I would say that I feel bad for you, but it was the fact that you guys are where you are on the ladder. Like, I have limited sympathy. Maybe some empathy, but that's the extent. Let's move along to the second game of tonight, 9:15 over in WA. It's West Coast against Geelong. And let's start off with West Coast. And because, of course, there's been a change in the ruck, Sarah Lakai has been omitted. Ali Drennan is out for personal reason. And in comes Liz McGrath. And also we have a debutante in Lucy Boyd. As for the Cats, it's Julia Crockett-Grills with a hamstring injury and then Piper Dunlop with some mild knee soreness, apparently, per a tweet from Sarah Black earlier this afternoon. And in comes Kate Darby, almost certainly to play that backup ruck role, and then also Caitlin Thorne. In terms of this game, Johnny, you are an owner of Aisling Maloney. She kicked, bag of 6 against West Coast last year, and then Lauren Pearce has come out in the last 36 hours and just talked about having a separate game plan for Aisling to kind of limit her impact.
Yeah, no, it's...
As an owner, how petrified are you of what's happening there, or are you happy to just forge ahead?
I think I'm going to go ahead and hold her, but it does fill me with a lot of concern. I wouldn't be trading her in. I think this West Coast team is, even though last year West Coast showed signs of improvement, this year is where they've really come out and shown, we're a very serious football side. We're gunning for the top 8, and this match is basically a final. I don't think the loser can realistically expect to make finals. So I think this is a must-win game for both teams. I can imagine there'll be a lot of players running with Maloney throughout the day, trying to limit any semblance of influence that they have.
Yeah, I think that's a great call. I think the fascinating situation to watch will be, is it Georgie Cleaver, who has probably copped a lot more mentions in our conversations and also on the pod for her excellent play this year? Does she have the mobility to go with Maloney? Or will they need to rely on the more mobile pairing of Roxy Roux or Charlie Thomas? I'm going to be fascinated to watch, but I do think that kind of targeted game plan is probably enough if you're sitting on the fence, and given there are so many potential forward options, to strike out Maloney as a trade-in target for just this week. The other question is probably, is this a week where Jess Wrench gets a discrete defensive responsibility on Georgie Prespakis? Is it Bella Lewis who gets that kind of role, or is West Coast just going to, go one-on-one and possibly even have Ella Roberts be the matchup that kind of you put your best on your best and come back at the end of the game?
I mean, that would be amazing to watch. I would love to see that.
Well, she did that to Ebony Marinoff last week, and it didn't necessarily pay off. But I do think that Ebony Marinoff and Georgie Prespakis are vastly different footballers. So, yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see. I don't know. I think that Georgie, probably second to Maloney, is the player with a target on their back when you're drawing up your game plan. So I think that that's a definite concern for me. Probably wouldn't be looking to target her. Other players in this game to potentially think about, Lauren Wackfer.
Yeah.
It would be an injustice for anyone but Will to make to drill down into some analysis about why you should pick her. But look, I think it's been shown so far this season that if you're rucking against Geelong, chances are you are going to score a bunch of points. I was also just trying to see if I could find any stats for Lucy Boyd, because I must admit I don't know a whole lot about her.
Yeah.
On
the switch and ruck here, quickly, I think Liz McGrath this season has generally played lower game time than Sarah Wackfer. Sorry, Sarah Lakai. I'm all over the place. So I'm not too worried by the switch. I know it's like an established ruck coming in, but an established ruck going out. So to me, it's a 1-for-1. I know there's a lot of concern about that out there. I'm not so worried myself.
I think and as you rightly put it, it's because Lakai is the one leaving, and Wackford has been scoring this well with Lakai playing in the side. That should give you some heart to be able to, if you were in that desperate position to need to, make a ruck trade like that, then she is a worthwhile consideration. So quickly on Lucy Boyd, a 172 centimetre, utility, plays both intercept defender and as a forward. And having a look at what she did for the West Adelaide women's side, averaged about 60 fantasy points in her most recent season. And then for under 18s, it was a bit less. It was about 40 to 45 points. So not exactly a proven scorer, and in a position where, surprisingly, very recently, West Coast have a lot of depth. So I don't necessarily love her as a downgrade target if you are looking for someone to provide coverage in the case of an emergency for the last 3 weeks of the season. Any other players you wanted to talk about in this one?
I don't think so, to be honest. I think that's...
I guess Charlie Thomas is we did have a bit of a conversation earlier in the week about her and kind of where her season trajectory has gone, and possibly not in the direction we were considering. In all likelihood, you're probably dealing with some additional injuries this week, and so it makes it more difficult to trade out of someone like Charlie Thomas.
Yeah.
And so it might just be betting on a regression to the mean and not forcing a trade on that front. But I wouldn't necessarily be doing it with a whole lot of confidence and expecting the kind of high 60s, low 70s that we've taken for granted for the past 18 months from Thomas.
Yeah. Well, I think I do want to talk about Charlie Thomas, but I think I might leave it until we get to the Melbourne game, because she's $3K more expensive than a player that I think is going to be a pretty key discussion.
Yeah, well, why don't we jump right into it? It is Sydney against Melbourne out at Casey Fields. So we'll start off with Sydney. Out goes Chloe Molloy with a back injury. We did hear about this one earlier in the week, so it wasn't a shock on the team sheet. It does sound like they will expect her back for round 11. And in comes Giselle Davis. And then for Melbourne, out goes Georgia Gall injured, Gabby Colvin omitted, Denby Taylor omitted, and then in comes Saray Taylor, Sarah Lampard, and Shelley Heath. So for those that aren't across the positions of some of these non-fantasy relevant players from Melbourne, that is a tall forward and 2 defenders going out, and in comes 3 defenders. And obviously the player you want to talk about is Shelley Heath. So by all means, take the floor. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so Shelley Heath, I think obviously we've talked up, down, all the different things this year. I just wondered, now that they're back, are they going straight back into that midfield? Because I know they were up and down throughout, but I think their best is fantastic. And even in the last couple of weeks before they exited the team with that finger issue, they had 65% CBAs against Gold Coast. I think 50 against Essendon, but missed the whole last quarter. So I think would have been on track for a similar sort of number. I think they're probably going straight back into the midfield. And we're really, really struggling for solid options. I think Shelley Heath's floor is as high as what Thomas has been scoring lately. Honestly, as high as what a lot of players have been scoring lately. But I think her top end is very, very good. I really like the fact that Melbourne, with a lot of these ins, their team is looking a lot more ominous than it did at the start of the year. I think they've got a lot of their injuries sort of mostly back into the team, not 100%, but quite a lot of them. And I think, if they can get their ball movement going, they could put up as a team a pretty high fantasy score. And I think Shelley Heath playing through the midfield could be a big beneficiary of that.
I think that's a fairly good summation of my position, with my one addendum that it's bizarre that Melbourne's ball movement has been progressively worse in the past few weeks than earlier in the season when they were more injured. And I do wonder if, and I think it speaks to the fact that Gabby Colvin and Denby Taylor, who are both chopped in and out in the past month and will come in off injuries, are out this week. And then in comes 2 other players that have either missed with injury or been in and out of the side. I don't know necessarily if Mick Stanier is comfortable yet on the roles and makeup of that North Melbourne D50. And they are a balanced side insofar as they expect their defenders, their midfielders to all be capable of leading, a transition chain. And at the moment, the defence is letting them down. Unless it's being generated from an intercept by Maeve Chaplin, I don't necessarily think they're particularly comfortable with the quality of their ball movement. And so where Shelley Heath goes, given that, she had CBA time in those weeks leading up to her injury, but a lot of those CBAs would see her start CBA and then drop back into defence. I'm just unsure of how good they're going to look as a defence, which is not to say that they're going to be bad, but I just don't know if they are comfortable with how everything's looking.
Yeah.
And I think
that concern.
One other thing I wanted to mention. Since we've seen less of Shelley Heath, a little bit less, the player who has looked exceptional is Megan Fitzsimon as a more midfield-oriented player who I think potentially fits better into the mix of Hanks, and Hoare as the main midfielders. It's going to be fascinating to watch. I can't say I have a strong position on where it'll land, but it is one that I'll be watching intently given Shelley Heath's price. Because I think that the alternative here is you've got a Sydney matchup, which, having a look at how they are difficult for midfielders, one of the very difficult teams outside of North Melbourne.
Yeah.
And I think that there are some other defenders who are underpriced, like Emma Carney, who have far better matchups this week. If you are in a position to make trades where you are able to pivot across to players who don't have or who have more advantageous matchups in the next fortnight, I might be tending there before going Heath with, again, a very changed structure for Melbourne.
Yeah. I definitely don't think it feels like a higher risk play. I think you could very easily get to either end of the, top end or the bottom end of her range of scoring. I just don't think the floor is so bad compared to a lot of other defenders could do.
That's a fair point. And in terms of, let's just have a quick squeeze at her break even. She is currently priced at 58.3 with a break even of 57. She's averaged 65 so far on the season. Will be, in all likelihood, below 800K to start next week. So I think if you are really looking to take that early step, take an early jump, and you are cash strapped, then I don't think it's a bad play. But I think that if you are, not necessarily needing two defenders, I think Niamh McLaughlin, who we'll talk about in a minute, is the best option in defence. And then there are some North players that I really like. There are some other defenders that are a little cheaper that I like. And then Shelley Heath is a bold, aggressive play that I also don't mind. It's just you're going to be probably stressed watching the game. Right. All right. Let's move along. Let's just have a quick discussion of some other players in this game because we have just spent a decent chunk of time on one. Kate Hoare has been down on form recently, given her current price. If you do hold, like, for example, in Stollerine, the official free kick team, 1.087 is her current price. It's almost an unfortunate situation where it's just slowly sliding back in the last month. That means you're not going to get much value for her. Is it worthwhile trading this week? Or is it a case of you trust her to at some point bag another swag of goals and push her score back up above 100?
Yeah, I think this is one of those options where if you've got a little bit of cash and you go up to say, sorry about that, dog's gone off. If you could spend a little bit of cash and get your way up to like at least a Gabby Newton, like someone who's in good form, has a good run, then I would do it. But I've seen a lot of trades floating around where people are going sideways. And I just think, around that 1.1 to 1 million mark, like I really don't think there's anyone there that screams, I'm more likely to put up 100 than Kate Hoare is. And that's what worries me. So I
think
wouldn't
that's a good point.
necessarily be trading. Yeah.
Yeah, it is obviously one that it will be at this point. It'll be very team dependent, but a name to keep in mind. Any other ones you want to discuss here? I think we've both agreed so far that Laura Gardner is the top VC option for the weekend.
Yeah.
Just given her current form.
There's probably only one name that worries me, and it's Maeve Chaplin. What is the impact of Sarah Lampard's return in your mind?
Well, this kind of
One
goes to
game-
the same point I was trying to make earlier, which is I think that I'm not sure Mixtania knows what Maeve
the
Chaplin's
one game they
best
both
role
played this year,
is.
they both put up 30s, which has me a little concerned.
Which game was that one? If you don't, I haven't got those stats up. Right,
all the way back at the start of the season. Yeah, a fair while ago. Like Lampard hasn't played in a good long time.
It has been a hot minute, and that was against the notoriously dour Western Bulldogs, where I don't know how much time that ball spent anywhere near Melbourne's defence.
Yeah.
That was probably one of the most sound defeats of any team this year that hasn't involved North Melbourne.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really one-sided, but just something to mull over. I think given the 1.1 million price tag, I think it's worth holding just because, like, even if she loses 100K, she's still able to be traded to anyone. But I just wouldn't be trading her in at the moment, and I would be a little bit nervous.
Yeah. But I think then you're insulated, like you said, by the cash. So if she does have a role shift again, we did see a lot of role movement for her last year. She did have that patch of 2 or 3 weeks where she was the predominant ball user and looked excellent and was part of the reason that a whole bunch of people, including myself, traded her in. Yeah, she is a tough one to pick. It's again frustrating because her amazing scoring games also come when she gets a whole swag of coaches' votes. So when she's playing well, it's noticed and is clearly core to what they're doing. So yeah, it's going to be a real tough one to predict. I don't think you're targeting her this week, but I don't think you're trading her out, particularly given the lack of clear option that is a guaranteed premium that you're comfortable will score well this week.
Yeah.
All right, let's move across to the Kangaroos and the Adelaide Crows. It is one change for North. It is Mia King out, and in comes Amy Gavin Mangan. And then for Adelaide, out goes Amy Boyle-Carr injured, Christina Lutzi omitted, and in comes Brooke Smith and Stevie Lee Thompson. Biggest change for this game is obviously Mia King going down. It does leave the competition's tightest midfield rotation a player down, and without their, let's call it their number one backup option in Ailish Sheeran. I think that there are almost too many, like there are going to be lots of potential options for North Melbourne to play bit part roles in the midfield this week to replace Mia King, given we've seen Amy Smith, Gemma Bruton and Bella Eddy all play some midfield time before. But the player I do want to talk about as a potential midfielder is Bricky Wall. just given the midfield makeup at North Melbourne, and particularly given they do lack a larger body when Jazz Garner is on the bench, Vicky Wall is a unique problem solver and a dominant tackler. So it's not something that I'm willing to say with much conviction and guarantee any good fantasy scoring either. It's just a name to watch, particularly given Mia King is out for at least the rest of the home and away season. Vicky Wall is named as a forward and can tackle extremely well, can also bag a goal here and there. Just a name to consider. If you're, Jono, putting your Darren Crocker skin suit on and rocking up to coach this weekend, what's your midfield rotation for North?
Yeah, I think you'll see those main three getting incredibly high minutes. Like I would expect, 85, 90% CBA mids. And then I would expect a few players to rotate through. So I think Eddie and Bruton are probably going to be the main ones. But it would be interesting to see. The big body problem is a tough one. So I would love to see Vicky Wall rotate through. That'd be fascinating.
Yeah. And I think that, Ailish Sheeran may not be from Ireland per se, but she does have an Irish-like flair to the way that she plays, particularly when in the midfield. And I think Vicky Wall could do some of the same. And it's something that I personally have been thinking about and hoping for since, halfway through Vicky Wall's first season.
Yeah. I think the main problem that we have is that if I'm Darren Crocker, my main thought is, well, I'm going to back us to win this with who we've got anyway. So I think the main three are just going to get as many minutes as they can because they've, even last week when they got destroyed in that first quarter by Richmond, they turned it around so fast and basically won every clearance for the rest of the game. Like they're at their best, they're unbeatable, and it's just, keep backing them in and making sure you're giving them as much opportunity. It's just going to be about timing the bench rotations to make sure they're still fresh as much as they need to be.
And as we've talked about many times on this podcast, Darren Crocker is the best bench manager in terms of keeping his midfielders fresh throughout the game and consistently finding rotations and times to pull them off. So whether or not that's something personally managed by Crocker, but North Melbourne are exceptional at that. So I do trust them to find a way to do it. There have been a few questions, popping in and out of our, social media channels about Ruby Tripodi. Just given the fact that obviously Mia King is down, Ruby Tripodi's time in the midfield probably does go up. Is she worthwhile jumping onto, given she did have increased midfield time on the weekend against Richmond, but really didn't score well, only managing a 41-point effort in 77% time on ground? Is she worthwhile trading in, or is it, an absolutely only if you're desperate type of move?
Yeah, I think that's probably where I'd frame it, where I think anyone who's got, a Kate Hoare or better, I just don't think it's worth it. I think the risk that you'll have to losing points on field is not gonna be worthwhile. But there's a lot of people out there who don't even have a player like Kate Hoare. There's a lot of people who are rocking with Zippy Fish still. I've seen teams who have players like Isabel Pritchard on the bench, teams who have Ellie Blackburn on the bench. I know teams with Jess Fleming on the bench, which I love a lot. And I think a lot of these players haven't been putting up huge numbers recently. And so I think if I was in that situation and I go, I'm struggling for cash around the field, I can make, 200K going down to Tripodi this way. I think in that instance, the risk is probably worthwhile.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. It is just, though, coming with a fair amount of risk, given that when she is in that midfield group with Garner and Riddell, she's going to be comfortably the third option and the third worst scorer. Or the worst 100%. Scorer, sorry. Third best.
I wouldn't be
scorer.
Expecting better than, say, an 85 at the best case scenario. And if you do end up with a 40, then that's the risk you've taken.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily think you'd be banking on a whole lot of cash movement as well, given that she's had a 34 and a 41 in her last 3 games. That 34 is coming out of her price cycle, though, so that's a plus. It's going to be a difficult one. I will say this as well. 63% time on ground against Brisbane for an 80 on the back of 11 tackles, and still managed that with 3 frees against 2. So can tackle highly against those teams that love to tackle. Had 9 against Fremantle, 8 against Port Adelaide. There's definitely potential for her to be a decent scorer. I just argue against most teams bringing her in. The other players to kind of talk about in this game, it's the midfield groupings like outside of Marinoff at Adelaide. So it's Goodwin and Hatchard. And what other players are rolling through that centre bounce rotation this week? I just don't think that Adelaide will feel like their midfield is performing to its best, particularly defensively. Is this a week to jump off Sarah Goodwin? Like, if you had to say what she's going to score this week, is it going to be closer to that Gold Coast 110 plus or last week's 60 odd?
Yeah, I've got my money on a high 60 score. I think that's what we can expect here. I want to clarify that I think a 60 score that you can rely on week to week is actually a lot better than what a lot of our defenders have been putting up recently. So, you look at the round points for defenders last week. Of anyone with more than 10% ownership, there was 5 players? Like it's it's kind of
It was
hard to
not
find
good.
someone that's reliable. Yeah. So I wouldn't necessarily be jumping ship unless you're really desperate for cash, right? So that's a scenario where I think it's okay, because someone like a Shelley Heath, I think, is also going to be putting up a 60 score for 200k less. So I don't mind jumping off in that scenario. But yeah, I wouldn't necessarily think it's a top priority, particularly with all the chaos that's been going on the injury front this week.
Yeah, and I think that's probably where it does land for most teams. The injuries in defence to Gay and to Conan likely leaves a lot of teams who've been actively trading in and out of that defence in a spot where they are unable to make these more luxury moves based on a matchup or the potential that there will be a bit of a shift. Because I think that's the kind of unspoken part of this, which is Adelaide probably consider a move towards their quote-unquote more traditional midfield structure with both Marinoff and Hatchard in there to try and match it with North Melbourne. And I do wonder if that does push out or push down on Sarah Goodwin's midfield time just a little bit. As we kind of talked about, and I heard you talking about with Bales on the Fantasy Fanatics podcast this week, it probably impacted less because Chelsea Randall isn't playing. But I do think that there's a higher likelihood that Anne Hatchard is playing CBAs this week, which might see less time for Goodwin.
Yeah. To me, it kind of depends how they come out of the gates, right? Because if the problem with taking Hatchard out of the forward line is, you what's the phrase? You're paying the piper to stealing from Paul, whatever it is. You're struggling when a ball gets forward, right?
Rob Peter to pay Paul.
Ground. I think the North backline is, an elite backline at intercepting and, running it out with speed. You want someone who can lock it in, and Hatchard has got to be one of the best in the business at doing that. So I would be hesitant to think that if they can start on a good footing, I think Hatchard will start more likely forward in the first quarter. And then if they're struggling to get the ball forward, that's when they flip that switch and they bring their best players in the middle. So I think Goodwin's going to have a chance.
It's a good call. Goodwin does have a chance to make an impression, but I would say the leash is shorter. In terms of some other players I wanted to talk about, I mentioned it earlier, Emma Carney this week. Adelaide are an elite matchup for defenders. She's below 700k, probably gets a good score this week, and then becomes a stress test for everyone who holds her, like me, given North Melbourne dominant position on the ladder and the need to manage Emma Carney's time on ground so that she is fit and firing for the finals. Yep. The other one is one of the there are the two highest scorers in defence for the round last week were both other North Melbourne defenders in Erica O'Shea and Eliza Shannon. I'm not suggesting you should be bringing in Eliza Shannon, but Erica O'Shea, the last two games she's played, she's put up record disposal, PB disposals, and she had over 500 metres gained last week, has become an incredibly important part of that ball movement system off halfback for North Melbourne, and particularly when you consider that the one game she's missed recently was that game against Essendon, where the ball movement in the first 30 minutes was as bad as we've seen it from North Melbourne this year, outside of round one against Geelong. I think she's an incredibly important part of that ball movement system, and she is below 850k. So if you are in the luxurious position of having held Niamh McLaughlin, who we think is the number one target this week, subject to some maybe further discussion later about what shenanigans Reshaw will get up to, I really like, if you can afford it, bringing in Erica O'Shea this week.
Yeah, no,
just
I fully agree.
90 last week, last three games, 90, 66 and 82. She's in some ripping hot form. I think she could be another excellent scorer. It's just unfortunate that I'm not going to be able to bring her in based on cash and the fact that I've got to manage both Window and Malloy out in the forward lines, which is disappointing. But if you do have the capacity to, Erica O'Shea is a great target this week. On that note, then, we'll jump across to GWS against Fremantle. It is very few changes in this game. Out goes Anya Tighe for the Dockers, and in comes Poppy Stockwell. And for the Giants, it's semi-sub Alicia Newman out for Alicia Eva. This game is one where you'd already mentioned it. I think Gabby Newton is the most, interesting midfield target this week based on her form. But Gabby Newton and also by extension Yara Bowers are both players who could score really highly this week. My one concern is, as much as GWS can allow big scores to midfielders, they are not a particularly high tackle game team. And that is where the bulk of the points for a lot of these Dockers midfielders come from. Which force wins out? Is it Fremantle's penchant for high tackle games, or is it GWS's desire to have everything be, free flowing or, limited stoppage football?
It's
tricky. It's a tough one.
Yeah, I think it's probably going to be dependent on the weather. I think if it is dry, I would be very hesitant to do it, particularly because the other thing that worries me is that the few clearances that we do get, Mim Strom is going to be so much stronger in the ruck contests than whichever.
So much stronger
up against. And the problem with that is that she's just going to be taking the ball out of the ruck and clearing it. I think that's a very likely scenario this weekend. So I guess unless you're getting really high numbers, which I would hope, in a wet game you probably would see, I think otherwise we could see a struggle to get those clearance numbers, and you'd have to be relying on around the ground work. And I do think Gabby Newton is an excellent mark. She's fairly tall. She finds it on the outside, but it's not probably her the game plan that she wants to go with.
Or at least her high-scoring game plan in her current role at Fremantle, as much as she was a predominantly mark player when she was playing at the Western Bulldogs. How does this sound for weather in Sydney? It's going to be 23 degrees, slightly sunny, no, a 10% chance of rain and 10 kilometre an hour winds.
Sounds pretty nice day overall, I would say.
That sounds just about perfect, if I'm being honest.
It's
so probably not ideal. Now, Cambridge McCormick is another player I wanted to talk about. Probably excels in some good conditions. She is a very clean footballer and now no longer has to match up on Anya Tai, which we talked about last week. You'd already been projecting weeks in advance for players who weren't even in your team. Cambridge McCormick has had 2 bad scoring weeks in a row. Does it get better, though, now that she's playing against Fremantle, who are a great matchup for defenders, and doesn't have a tall forward to play against?
Yeah. Well, I think we were talking about Maloney before being, the player to stop at Geelong, in that West Coast matchup. And the week before, McCormick was up against Jessie Wardlaw, who, we all know what Wardlaw can do, how important she is to St Kilda's ball movement and forward scoring. I mean, that's 2 of the toughest matchups you can have as a key defender in a row. Fremantle have a lot of damaging options, but I don't think there's necessarily an obvious candidate for McCormick to go to if Anya Tai is out. So
does that make her a trade-in target?
And I think that, I don't know if it makes her a trade-in, but I do think the chance of her returning to, the 60s that she was scoring before the last couple of weeks, I think that makes it more likely.
So before the 39 and 53, she's had in the last fortnight, it was 79, 65, 66 and 82 in the month before that. Mm-hmm. I think it's more likely than not that we see a high 60s, low 70s from McCormick this week. So 729K. And to think that she was she up at $1 million? She was in the high 900s not that long ago.
Pretty close, yeah.
To now be underneath the price of Niamh McLaughlin is wild. And honestly, it would be a player that I would be happy to trade in, if only because I genuinely enjoy watching her play. Like high tackles, 180 centimeters, clean, fast. Like, I think it's worthwhile if you're really just looking for someone you enjoy watching. She would be very high on the list. So I definitely think it's a possibility to trade in. Anyone else? I'm just trying to think. Is there anyone else that we were talking about in this game that might be worthwhile targeting? I think it's just worthwhile noting that next 2 weeks after this game, Fremantle have some stunning matchups for defenders. So Richmond into Adelaide. Emma O'Driscoll is a name to keep a watch on as a result.
Yeah. Here's a question for you. I think we've talked a lot about Gardner being a great VC option. Kiara Bowers is a great captain option, but I think a lot of people are looking for left field options to try and keep some diversity. Would you look at Mim Strom?
Well, I did think about this, and I wonder if the problem is low repeat stoppages from GWS. That's very much the way that they play. So I do worry that might cap Strom's scoring. Yeah. Just with the way she's playing at the moment. And last year, she was playing almost 100% CBAs every single week and was only coming off the 2 or 3 minute spell each half, but would only do that after having taken the CBA as well. That's not really what's been going on this year. And so...
Well, now they've got Indy Strom chopping out.
And they've got Indy Strom's chopping out. They've had like a bunch of other random players taking it inside the forward 50. Tanisha Kikoak, seen a little bit of Georgie Brisbane as well, I think. But feel free to correct me on that one. I might be, completely making something up in my head. I just don't know if, and I think that's reflected in the scale and how difficult GWS are for rucks. It's not so much that they're hard rucks to score against because they're very difficult matchups. It's just that GWS don't force a lot of repeat stoppages. That's the issue.
Yeah.
In terms of, I think the advantage this week in terms of captains, right, is that because so many of them play at the same time. So all of Bowers and the Riddell, Garner, Marinoff all play at the same time. So 3:00 Eastern Daylight Time on Saturday means that there's probably going to be a fairly decent spread across them, that you won't have that same degree of concentration. And so it will be a case of picking probably one or two of the right ones, quote unquote. But I don't think it'll have that same issue of like, well, everyone's just going to do this week. Like, it's not a case of, Ebony Marinoff is playing against a team that love to tackle. She's playing against Fremantle. This could be a huge score. Everyone's going to go Gardner into Marinoff, and then you're trying to look for some variety. I think this week the variety could come from those top 5 uber primo mids because of that diversification. And there's no like one standout clear option. I think all 4 below Gardner have a reason for concern.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah. So now we've got a bit of a gap. For whatever reason, there's no game at 5:00. So don't be alarmed if the footy coverage on Saturday just disappears for 2 hours. 7:15, Carlton against St Kilda at Icon Park. For the Saints, it's another midfielder out injured, Charlotte Simpson, and in comes Darcy Guttridge. And then for Carlton, it's very disappointingly Aisling Reedy, fresh off a absolutely superb score with a goal. Didn't make any cash, but it was still nice to see her actually scoring, out-omitted, as well as Mia Austin. And then in comes Madison Torpey against Maddie Gearan, fresh off having been dropped for 2 weeks, which again is quite shocking. In terms of surprises, if you could pick a team to have 3 rucks against, would you pick St Kilda?
I mean, 3 times the advantage, right?
What are you doing?
It's a strange choice for sure.
It's bizarre. Like, okay, Brianne Harrington had, I think, her lowest ruck time of the year last week, or very, very low time in the ruck contests. So it might be that there's now a bit of a commitment to just Harrington playing forward. But it is a fascinating choice to pick a rookie ruck so that you have 3 in your side to go against a team who have a first-year ruck as their sole ruck in the squad. It's not like they gave advanced warning of Reen Karras also playing, and so Carlton have kind of gone with, the rumours and picked another ruck to match. They've truly gone off the beaten path here with that tactical choice.
Yeah, I can imagine that after that Sydney game, they weren't too happy with the pressure that their forwards were putting on the Sydney defenders, who were really streaming forward and delivering it inside 50 pretty much unopposed. I can imagine that's why they've made these changes, and they're just hoping that Gearan and Torpey can put a little more pressure on.
Yeah, I also feel like Maddie Gearin is a necessity to play in this midfield this week. I don't, and I hate to say this, Jono, but starting midfield that includes Brooke Vickers is not one I would back to win consistently. And Abby Mackay had the worst game I've seen her play in 2 years last week, and the clearances she was generating were as low a value as I've seen from a player that we probably all recognise as being of high quality in a very long time.
Yeah. I think they missed the run of Mimi Hill because I think her coming out of that midfield, she likes to use it by hand and kind of break the lines a little bit, and it makes them a very different proposition.
Yes,
particularly when Kieran is the player to do that type of role, though, and I think that's the issue: is they really just need Hill back.
I think the problem there is that I don't know if they need Mimi Hill back. They need to give Keely Shearer the role she had for the previous 2 seasons, where she broke out and was one of the best midfielders in the comp, for her age, and was worthy of getting a tag. She's now been relegated to a defensive player. I think that's a huge error. She's more than capable of playing that run and carry role. And I think that bringing in Gearin, who was Carlton's best clearance player when she was in the midfield last year, is a massive benefit. But then again, I've not seen eye to eye on selectional roles for Carlton for a lot of this year. So I could be fully off base and making stuff up on the spot, and it's not how it's going to play out. So just wanted to give my 2 cents on how things play out. In terms of some rookie options this week, Ariana Clark had a bunch of midfield time last week. I think nearly 50% CBAs, is sitting at 300K as a forward, is a great downgrade option if you do need one. I think Serene Watson probably has a bit of a tough time scoring this week just by virtue of the way that Carlton play, but I don't think it's anywhere near enough to be concerned about trading her out. And if you are looking for a target, I still think she's going to be great, for the rest of the year. So wouldn't necessarily be saying don't trade her in either.
Could I interrupt this very, very, non-Hawthorn related chat with an important update here?
Classic Jono.
Lucy Wales has been named a late out.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, gee whiz.
I think that's going to impact some things.
Well, let me just jump onto the Free Kick Twitter account.
I can't confirm it. I need to figure that one out. Yeah.
Gee whiz. Well, whilst I go and spread that news, if you wouldn't mind just jumping in and doing a little rundown of Essendon and Brisbane, that'd be lovely.
Yeah. All right, let's have a look. So Essendon and Brisbane is our Sunday game. So for the Bombers, we've got Maggie McLaughlin out injured, as well as Madison Gay injured as well, out for the rest of the season. This is, I suppose, where a lot of the chaos comes in yet again.
It's carnage week.
Sophie Strong and Alexandra Morecambe come in. And then for the Lions, Brianna Conan is out injured. She's done a hamstring at training, probably out for the rest of the home and away, but could be back for finals, whilst Ruby Spark has come back into the side from that concussion. So,
just to confirm, that is correct news. Lucy Wales is out with appendicitis. Geez, that is the first time I have ever seen that as the reason for a late out. So hopefully she gets better. And Ellie Simons has come back into the team.
Yeah, straight back into the ruck. That's going to be interesting. Matilda Schultz is
Matilda Schultz's stocks. Oh my God, it could be a 120 plus. Gee whiz. Yep. Well, might have to consider changing your tips as well. Jesus Christ, that is a massive late change. And we thought that this week was already chaotic enough with all the injuries. Wow. Well, let's try and whip through these Sunday games and get to some questions, and also give some time to the people to make changes to their lineups. You talked about Brie Conan out, very poorly timed with all the other injuries this week, on top of Maddie Gay now likely being shut down for the rest of the season with another bit of an ACL soreness. This game, I'd say my top 2 targets, Jade Ellinger and Charlie Mullins. At the moment, Mullins has been getting time in the CBAs. Jade Ellinger is in ripping hot form, has been freed up to play a more natural running halfback role in the past 3 to 4 weeks. If you had to pick, there is also a case to be made for Nat Grider at 587K. I will just say that she is notorious for going big score right back into a quiet one while still absolutely doing a job and being considered one of the the team's best players. So don't expect that 70 to be the norm, even if Brie Conan is out.
Yeah. I imagine it looks like they've named Poppy Bolts in the back line. I imagine that to be the trigger they pull. But yeah, it certainly is going to not make things easier for Knack Ryder.
No, I still think though there's a possibility that she'll score well, just with a bit more of a higher up on the pecking order, not necessarily for lots of disposals from her teammates, but to be in better spots, to get intercepts, to get tackles in some of the areas that you typically see Brie Conan. Charlie Mullins has a hilariously low break-even. Will has been banging on about her for a couple of weeks. At the moment, I'm looking at trading her in. And I don't know if I'm necessarily going to get pushed off it just because of that break-even and a matchup against a completely hampered Bombers side, even if it is at Windy Hill, where they can have some very weird results. See what happened against North Melbourne earlier in the year. I think she's a great target, possibly even better than Laura Stone, because her break-even is that much better and the matchup is incredible. Pitting the two of them against each other, I've kind of made my position known. What are you thinking?
I mean, I am a big fan of Mullins. I'm a big fan of Ellinger, I think, in this game. Probably the two. Yeah.
Sorry, in terms of Mullins v. Stone as forward
Mullins
targets,
v.
particularly if you've got Piper Window.
Yeah, I would probably go Mullins. But yeah, it's a close one. I kind of like the idea that this locks a little bit later in the round. If you got Window, it doesn't matter anyway. But I think with Stone, it's going to be traded out at some point. Whilst I think Mullins playing off half back, even when they come up against the tougher teams like Melbourne, I still think is going to be a good play. So I probably prefer Mullins on that basis.
Yep, I am with you. All right, let's whip across to Collingwood against Richmond. Probably one of the lower fantasy relevant games this week at Collingwood. One change, Eliza James out, Mel Morris-Dalton in. Richmond, Brazzali and Shevlin out, and in comes Greaves and Sarah Hosking. We already talked about Sarah Hosking being a solid downgrade option in the forward line. Probably more likely to get a coverage score than Ariana Clark, who we also like as a downgrade option. There are two targets in this game. I think they are Mon Conti and Imogen Barnett. Of course, as they do every week at this stage, Imogen Barnett has been named in the forward pocket, but she has been comfortably the more prominent ruck this season. Mon Conti, I guess the question will be if someone like Ruby Slasher is in good enough fitness and not being thrown in the forward line to be given a defensive role to limit Conti's influence. I think given the scores we saw from someone like Georgia Patrikios last week, who I'm not saying she's anywhere near as damaging as Conti at the moment, but they probably play in a similar fashion. And I think that could be a boon for Conti. It's just, I think that there's also a high potential that there's a bit of a team tag put on Conti with the way that Richmond are playing at the moment.
Sometimes you see Benici kind of play a run with role as well, where she starts on the opposition star, and then if the opportunity comes, then she runs off. I think she's an excellent tackler. So
Benici playing probably a little bit more prominent role ball use wise, but has a similar type of game style as Beck Beeson, who does something very similar. Will often play as a defensive and then maybe look to work off. Britt Benici probably does the defensive stuff a little bit less, but still is very capable of winning her own ball.
She did that against Laura Gardner, and I thought that was a really excellent game from her. So I can see something similar there.
Yep, I think that's an excellent call. All right, let's move along to the final game of the round, and it is the Suns against the Western Bulldogs. Two changes in this game. Jazz Smith out and Brooke Barwick in for the Bulldogs, and then Ellie Vierhuis out, and then in comes Sienna McMullen. This game is one where I've now mentioned it about half a dozen times, but Niamh McLaughlin, where is she going to play? Riddle me this, Jono. Where is she going to play this week?
Yeah, I think she starts off half-back, and depending on how the game's going, she moves into the midfield.
Does she spend some time forward? Can we happily shelve that away as a bad nightmare?
I think that was an injury thing. I don't think that was, and I also think it was, if you're going to test it out, you test it out in a game against Brisbane that you know you're not going to win. I think that's not going to happen in this game, which I think the Gold Coast, particularly after that last quarter against the Hawks, they'll see this as a winnable game, and they'll have McLaughlin playing the most prominent role they can.
Yep, I hope that is correct. It's definitely a situation where if I was in that position, it would be something I'm doing. But again, this is another coach where I've not necessarily felt comfortable with in predicting what Rhyce Shaw is going to do week to week. So it has been very, very difficult. And I'm just hoping and praying that this is where we see the Brit Gutnecht of the game against Collingwood again. I was actively considering a trade out earlier in the week, but with what's conspired in my team, she's living on. And honestly, I'm glad it's a Gold Coast matchup. Of all matchups to be forced to hold, I think I'm okay with this one.
Yeah, no, it's a pretty handy one.
And then I think Sarah Hartwig is in some great form, coming off a 73, 684K forward, so a hair below the Laura Stone price, and in the Charlie Mullins range as well. Let's just see what the difference is between them. I think if you really were looking for something interesting, you could look there. I think I just prefer Mullins for her break even and probably her consistency. I'm not necessarily sure I trust Sarah Hartwig to be a consistent player.
Yeah, I would say of the two players most likely to do well, it's going to be Hartwig. Maybe Elaine Grigg is the other one. But yeah, it's definitely a high-risk play. I'd go Hartwig first, and it does feel fairly risky.
Yeah.
So I'd go Mullins as well.
We have now made it through all the games for the weekend. Let's have a look at a few questions. And one that I had saved from earlier, it is from someone who we've heard a lot from this year, and it is someone who had previously been at the top of the rankings. It is the coach of Rosie's Ruiners, and he asks, because I have the unholy trinity of Malloy, Gay, and Window, do I want to trade in McLaughlin, Woodland, Stone? It feels like I'm ordering a mild butter chicken. Is there an obvious spicy Vindaloo alternative? Can include Sarah Verrier, which is a great way to get your question answered. Not to say that we play favourites at all. It does obviously help that he's someone who's been ranked very highly, but I love the Sarah Verrier reference. It is absolutely guaranteed to get our attention. If you weren't going to go McLaughlin, Woodland, and Stone, what's your spicy Vindaloo alternative?
Yeah, so I love the framing of the question. I do think this is a good point, though, because if you look at players like Woodland, already owned by nearly 60 of the top 100, even Laura Stone is getting up there as something like 8th or 9th most popular forward at this point. So I do think if you're trying to differentiate yourself from some of the top coaches, because these top teams, they have everyone you could possibly want. It's actually incredible how they've gotten their teams in such good nick. So I think you need to look at those that are a little bit lower owned. I think the big one that I really like this week is going someone cheap like a Charlie Mullins and then getting a Courtney Hodder on the other side of things. I think Hodder's been in incredible form and is so expensive that still only, 26 of the top 100 are actually on Courtney Hodder at the moment, despite the fact that she's gone, at 100 over the last 4 weeks.
Yep.
I think that's probably what I would do in the forward line. In defense, though, on the other side of things, because we've got to fix Maddie Gay as well, it's a little bit trickier there because the options are, they're so up and down. Who would you go in the back line? Is it Erica O'Shea?
I think it is Erica O'Shea as the spicier option. And if you really want burn your tongue off spicy, I think it is Cambridge McCormick now that there's no Anya Tighe. But I don't think you should be doing that given the position you're in. He has in his team, he has Maddie Gay as his D1, Colin Malloy and Piper Window F4, F5. Does have coverage across most of the lines, has Cox, Basenko, Indy West and Charlotte Wilson. And I would also say very helpfully has the ability to get a look at Charlie Thomas as a looping option at D5 because Looper in the utility, Lily Baker, and then Charlotte Wilson, who plays against the Western Bulldogs. If Charlie Thomas does another 40, which he has done more than we were expecting this year, or those low 50s, you could really take a... Sorry, she's not scored a 40. She's scored more 50s, I reckon, this season than any time since her first season. Could use Charlotte Wilson, who maybe puts up a big score against the Western Bulldogs. I wouldn't say it's comfortable. I think I love Hodder as a target. I'm very envious. I had the option and I tossed up between Hodder and Ash Richards a few weeks ago. I chose Ash Richards. That looked incredible and has now absolutely derailed my season.
Yeah, it's a tough one. When you cop these injuries, it's just that's
and then I compounded it by trading her to bloody Chloe Molloy. And then we kind of didn't talk about it. Bonnie Toogood playing up against Brisbane. Again, I won't be shocked if she puts up an 80, much like she did against North Melbourne in the toughest matchup of all time. But because she dropped so deep, I do just, again, as I kind of raised last week, her ability or inability to impact the scoreboard when she's playing up so high in this iteration of Essendon does, and the fact that she's probably spent a little bit less time around the ball, at least last week, if there is a bit of shifting in the tides. So I think Hodder is probably your number one target. Maybe have a look at Toogood if you want to go more expensive than Woodland, all 4K more expensive.
I will say Woodland is actually lower owned than Toogood. Toogood to me is, third most owned forward? Maybe fourth? Yeah, third I think, if you don't count Lauren Young.
Yeah, I really do think that it's Woodland and Neve McLaughlin, and then your spicy one is Stone, is where you have a look at your at least one chili option on the takeaway menu. All right, let's get a look at some other questions quickly, given that we've been going for just over an hour now. I've got a question here from Corey Blackledge. Is it worth holding Anderson, or should I trade her out if getting Malloy, if you've got Malloy, McCormick, and Thomas? So Malloy is a forced trade in all likelihood, given you can get her back next week. She's not very expensive. But McCormick and Thomas are, players that we've talked about a number of times already today. Is it worth holding Ali Anderson going into Essendon, who have been, tending towards slightly tough as a midfield matchup, in order to be able to upgrade some of these underperforming defenders?
Yeah, no, it's a fair question. I think based on what we were talking about for McCormick, I think that's okay to try for one more week. I'd probably trade out Thomas. I think that's been a struggle recently, and I don't think there's any indication that that's going to get better. Like, if anything, they're bringing in more defenders. So I think the concentration of ball that they once had back there is spread out a little too much now. I wouldn't expect much better. I'd probably trade there. But yeah, when it comes to Anderson, I guess the real issue with trading Anderson is, where do you go? Because I think you've either got to go, like, who around Anderson's price are you looking at and going, they're going to comfortably outscore them? Like, at 1.142, if you get up to Gab Newton, I would do it. But even then, we talked about those issues. I don't think Anderson's scoring too poorly.
No.
I don't really think it's a priority. Yeah.
No, I fully agree with you. And I think, at very least, trying to find a way to get the cash to get a genuine, top line player. If you say, for example, you don't have TLR, finding the cash to upgrade Thomas to a TLR is where I'd be looking, as opposed to trying to make a lot, 3 upgrades across your team. Yeah. We've got a bunch of questions here. Got one here from, well, it's not so much a question, more a request for some assistance. It's from Isaac, who says, "Hey guys, love your work. I'm currently 15th and in rare territory. Wondering if you'd be able to look at my team and discuss what trades you'd look at doing, because I have no idea. 46K in the bank." I'll give you the highlights on his lowlights. He's coming off, by the way, a 16.05 last week, so a round rank of 56, and life's tough, really. has one forced trade this week, and it's Lauren Young. Already has Courtney Hodder on field. Has Ash Woodland, Montana Ham. It is a truly stacked team. Has, though, Goodwin, McCormick, and Thomas as D3 through 5. In his position with that 46K, are you looking at doing 3 defensive trades? Are you looking at maybe downgrading Lauren Young to an Ariana Clark, trading out McCormick and Thomas, and then banking a bit of cash for next week, holding Goodwin? Because I think bringing in Neve McLaughlin is at least one trade I'd be making, looking at this team.
Yeah, I think I would definitely be doing that. I'd probably go Thomas up to McLaughlin. I would probably use the cash from Steele Park just because, Young, I think, was managed more so than injured. I think there's a good chance they'll be back based on the report Port Adelaide put out. So
fair.
On that basis, get as much cash as you can. Steele Park's worth a little bit more. And see how high you can get Thomas up. Definitely to McLaughlin. And then I'd probably go McCormick out as well, just because you're in such a great position.
Team is in a
McCormick rebounding. Spot. I would just bring in someone that you feel a little more comfortable with. I think those two are the only real weaknesses on the team that I can see. Everything else looks pretty good.
So Thomas to McLaughlin, McCormick to Erica O'Shea, Sarah Steele Park down to 300K. I reckon that's pretty solid trade plan. Well, that's sorted. How were you struggling, Isaac? That was easy. I definitely appreciate sometimes it does become difficult re-looking at your own side constantly and arming and ahhing about all these different connotations. We have all been prone to it in the past. Let's quickly get to some other ones. Question here from Luke. Love your work, guides. Made the mistake of trading Schultz to Wales and Barnett to Malloy to be aggressive, but have dropped out of the top 3. Do I swallow my pride and correct that ruck trade this week? Feel as though Strom and Schultz have a nicer run home. Does that mean Schultz to Steph Wales? Kind of tough in this instance. I'm assuming so, given he's disappointed. Unless he's...
Lucy just went at 61, and this question might have come in before the late out.
It did come in before the late out, but it is, a bit difficult to figure out exactly what it is. I definitely think
either Wales that you have, I would be trading.
I would be trading it too. I think swallow your pride, recognize a mistake is a mistake. There is, there is no moral value attached to the trades you make each week. There is no one that says that you are better or worse as a coach in the rankings because you trade someone in and then trade them out again immediately. It's an important thing to remember. There is no pride in this game. There is only your points and the cash you make.
Yeah, I think this week will be, at the moment, the 3rd time that I have either traded in or traded out of Shelley Heath this season.
So, are you trading in? Are you trading in Shelley Heath?
At present, I am.
Well, let us use that as a nice little way to. Well, actually, no. We'll answer one more question. It is from friend of the podcast, Bales. He's asked Goodwin to Carney for the cash to be able to get Window up to Hodder. And I think then you can use it as a segue to talk about Courtney Hodder, because I know she's been front of mind for you on trades all week.
She has. I'm very much doing something similar, so I would recommend this. At the moment, I'm using the cash from Gay to McLaughlin, Goodwin to Heath, and that nets me enough cash that I can just take Taylor Smith, who's only at 681K, all the way up to Courtney Hodder, because I'm pretty excited for Hodder this week in particular. I think against Essendon could be a very good matchup. So
I'm hoping it's dreadful. I'm hoping it's truly miserable. So I think it's going to be I think that's a fairly good set of trades. I think Goodwin, we've kind of talked about, she's not going to be terrible, but I think her ceiling score is not in the bag this week. So I would be looking to trade. In terms of my trades, what I am currently looking at is, sadly, 3 injured players out. So it's Gay to McLaughlin, Malloy up to Imogen Barnett, and then Piper Window sideways to Charlie Mullins, banking a little bit of cash for next week, knowing that I have Emma Carney and Britt Gutnecht at D4 and D5, so hardly batting particularly deep in those lines. And fingers crossed, hoping and praying that Courtney Hodder gets 10 coaches' votes and scores a 60. That's where I'm at. And then I'm currently VC Gardner into the world's toughest decision. At the moment, I'm thinking it's Ebony Marinoff. Just having done a bit of extra research since we did our Fantasy Fix article. It's been an absolutely bumper pod today, if only because we've had to deal with, is it the most impactful late? Oh, actually, no. I was about to say the most impactful late out of the year. That happened last week. That was that was 2 weeks ago. That was Piper Window.
2 weeks ago.
After everyone traded her in. Nearly, let's call it nearly the most impactful late out of the week. At least it happens whilst everyone can still change their trades. Hopefully, there aren't any coaches out there with now 4 forced outs in the weeks of limited bench coverage. Hopefully you've enjoyed this evening. There are still a bunch of good questions coming in. It is clearly a difficult week for trades. We'll see if we can jump onto our Twitter account and answer some of them before the first lockout in just under half an hour. Hopefully you've got something out of tonight. You'll hear from us, as always, on Tuesday morning with our podcast, and then Jono and I will have Fantasy Fix out mid-morning on Wednesday. But until then, good luck with your weekend. Enjoy the football, and fingers crossed for some good scores.
Yeah, good luck, everyone.